Ben Llywelyn, let's talk. Sometimes it's good to have a chat. And I just would like to talk with you, especially Cornish speakers, and issue you a letter to the future. What are your realistic expectations? How are you going to save your language and your inheritance? How are you going to do it? Proposing to save the Cornish language is, as I shall show you, quite radical. Firstly, for those of you who are not aware of what the Cornish language is, it is a Brythonic language, kind of between Welsh and Breton, in the British branch of the Celtic languages. It was pushed back steadily over, well, a millennium or so, and then it was the end of the 18th century, it went out as a community language. Surely, and I know some of you will argue in the comments, well, it never went out, it never, there's various debates about how you say it. The point is, it wasn't used down at your local post office, was it? You didn't go and buy bread with it. You didn't have a conversation in Cornish in the pub. And if you can't have those things, the language is out. A famous fisherman wrote, I think it was in the early 1800s, that he was able to remember fishermen speaking it to him as a boy, but that in all his life he had never seen a book in his own language. That's quite poignant. Now, after the age of Henry Jenner, in the Edwardian period and just before, the Cornish language was revived as a spoken language. However, we don't know if something as simple as the Welsh was in it, because we don't have records of people speaking it all the way through. We have most of the sounds, certainly, and it certainly was a written language, far more in the early modern period than many languages in Eastern Europe, like Russian, frankly. Cornish wrote a lot, but we still don't have a lot. And this language is now spoken by a few thousand people. And if I'm correct, it's a mother language for a few dozen people now, which that in itself is a feat, but it's not a community language still. So I'm going to ask Cornish people who watch this and those Cornish speakers in the future to think, what is it going to take? Because what you are saying is deeply radical, to revive a language as a common social medium. So what's so radical about reviving a language? Well, Cornwall is on the Corn, the peninsula, and at the very end, toward the later phases, and that is what Cornwall is today, the very end. And sure, this is a defensive position, it's good to hold ground, which is why Cornwall maintained its language for so long, whilst the Welsh of the Old North went extinct. There's no possible way of bringing that back unless you reintroduce Welsh into those areas. But Cornwall held on, and there were people writing it at Penrhyn, the abbey there before the Reformation, which was so brutal and extinguishing toward the Cornish language and people. But this horn is good for keeping what you have. But that shape geographically is not good for resurrecting, because the reason why Cornish went extinct is it had no room to expand. It was never able to expand. Whatever is at the wider position on the peninsula slowly filters down. You have no way to expand territory. You're always defensive. So how do you get around that? That's your question once you revive the language. And the answer is density. You need communities. And where has this happened in history before, that a revived language has become a common language? Has that happened? Is it possible? Yes. In all of history, it's only happened, truly, once. And where was this? Israel. Hebrew. But Cornish people need to understand why it was done in Israel And how? Not just how, but why. There were several different factions of Jews. Many of them spoke Yiddish, others spoke Russian, others Ladino, Spanish type language, and Arabic, Greek, Persian even. So this Hebrew became a way to bridge all of these Jewish communities without favoring any of them. And then it was able to absorb and regather strength unto itself through 3 aliyah, migrations home. Now this is the crux of the problem for Cornish. There is going to be no migration home from a great diaspora. So what do you do? How do you fix this issue? Because you can't call upon a diaspora to bring them home and integrate them into Cornish. They're going to be integrated into English. How do you resolve that? How do you get over that hurdle? Well, that's a heavy one to carry. But you must. And there is an answer. Yes, there is an answer. And you'd say it's independence. I say no. Cornish independence is not the answer to bring that to fruition, because look at Ireland. That failed. That does not necessarily bring in a flourishing language again. Irish is alive, and that should be valued and made a distinguishing reward of virtue. But that is not the position you want Cornish to be in, where fewer than 1% or so, maybe 2%, use it daily, and that it's just a slogan in a pub, just a decoration. You don't want your language to be a decoration for an English-speaking republic. Now, I'm not insulting the Irish, but the Cornish, to erect an independent state, you would in the process go through so much tumult and trouble, you would lose your language, because England's not just going to give that to you. When many and most in Cornwall call themselves English. I'm sorry, but that is the situation. So what is the answer? What do you do? You need a community to come together, because at the moment you have a revived language and it's sprinkled like spangled stars through Cornwall and a few other nearby places. That's not going to work. So the first thing you have to do is, where is the densest position between them all, where you can coalesce and grow a community where your language is naturally spoken. You have to choose that location, and physically, with all of you together, as many as you can come together, be in that place and become the majority in that place. Now you might say, well, that's expensive. Yes, it is. And you'd say, well, what about property? And the housing crisis in Cornwall is dystopian. Yes, it is. But if that which is pushing you out is using a certain tool, so can you. You must become more successful at property than they, to use it to expand your density in a certain place. You must choose one place. If you can't choose it in Penwick, go toward Bodmin. If you can't afford that as a group, do it outside of Cornwall if you have to. The important thing is that you keep your language and that it becomes, again, a community language. It doesn't even have to be in Cornwall. You could do it in Devon. Cornish used to be spoken there. If you can't afford Devon, do it somewhere else. The point is, the United Kingdom is about to go through a period of upheavals it has not seen since the Reformation that broke Cornish languages back. And if you're not ready and in position to go through these tumults, it might be too much. You might lose the inertia that you've built of people holding on to this language and heritage, and you might like dust in the wind. So many other languages that languish out of existence in history. Dacian, Gaulish. It's happened so many times on these islands and elsewhere, so many times. So you must build a community, come together. Because if people don't come together regularly, what do you have? And you say, well, we have gatherings, a radio, you have a program. Now, that's good and all, but it's not enough. You need density, population density. Because language works like osmosis. By that I mean, you form a cell in a language that is a local community. Other smaller cells come into it, individuals. And if they hear and have the language all around them, it's a natural and organic process, which they become absorbed into being Cornish speaking. That's how you're going to need to do it. And time's running out. We don't know what's going to happen in Scotland, how the British state will react, what's going to happen in the century after Brexit. A lot of people are very proud to be British. They don't want any threats, and that in itself could be threatening to you. So what are you going to do? You need places where you are dominant, at all costs, at whatever cost. There are no rules. Merely keeping a language alive is not going to suffice when society goes through its cycles of upheavals and periods of instability and tensions, civil wars, recessions, the bad things that happen throughout human societies in history. It happens. So what you need is a house bordered with people who speak Cornish in one place, and focus all you have on acquiring a house adjacent and filling it all with people who speak Cornish. And gradually, the density will accumulate. Every action is an accumulation. Habits form your life and your mind. And if Cornish makes a habit of accumulating urban type density, osmosis will naturally accrue and the language will grow too, and you will last through whatever is coming to the United Kingdom, and dare I say, we live in exciting times. We don't know what is coming to Britain, and if you love Cornish and you want to speak it and have it grow, you're going to need to build some kind of social ship that can survive the storm brewing. You didn't survive the last storm. Make sure you survive this one.